Hello and welcome everyone to part 2 of this 3-part how-to series on conquering your pile of shame quickly and with outstanding results. On the last video we laid the foundation of the famous technique called Slapchop. If you haven't seen the first video, click here. Today we'll dive into the second step, which involves 3 stages. They're all pretty straightforward, but the amount of time it takes can vary depending on the amount of detail on your miniature. First, you will need to decide which color scheme you will be using for your army. In my case, I decided to use the color scheme of the Cronus Hegemony from the Leagues of Votan, a faction from Warhammer 40,000. We are going to use several contrast paints like Nastreg Yellow, Basilicanum Grey, Black Templar, Gore-Grunta Fur, and Cygor Brown amongst others. The procedure is simple enough. To achieve smoother application and minimize staining on flat areas, we'll first create a mixture by thinning the contrast paints with a dedicated medium and airbrush thinner. Now, the exact amount of medium and thinner we add depends on 2 things. What kind of shade do you want for this specific part of the miniature? Darker or lighter? And second, how textured is the surface? Flat surfaces benefit from a thinner mix, although you might need a few extra coats. But for textured areas like fur, beards, or even some leather, you can sometimes use the contrast paint straight from the pot. The mixture itself is pretty simple. Some contrast paint with a bit more contrast medium added for a lighter shade, or less contrast medium for a richer, darker tone. We also throw in a single drop of airbrush thinner. The airbrush thinner helps the mixture flow smoother and prevents those unwanted stains on flat surfaces. The amount of contrast medium we use depends on the contrast paint itself. Stronger pigments like Black Templar and Nastreg Yellow need a minimum 1-to-1 mix with contrast medium. For medium strength paints like Gore-Grunta Fur, a 3-to-2 or 2-to-1 mix works well. Weaker pigments can be used straight from the pot on textured surfaces, but for smoother areas a 4-to-1 mix with contrast medium is ideal. It's worth noting that only the weaker pigmented paints skip the airbrush thinner, while all the others get a single drop to keep things flowing smoothly and avoid stains. The key with contrast paints is to apply them in thin layers. This lets you build up the color gradually until you reach the desired shade. It's better to do multiple thin coats than try to cover everything in one thick layer. Following these steps and using contrast paints strategically creates a solid foundation for your miniatures with minimal effort. By experimenting with different mixing ratios, you'll discover your own favorite tones and consistencies for contrast paints. I would also recommend working with small amounts due to the paint drying and thickening with time. Now we can move on to stage 2. Stage 2 is straightforward. Here we'll simply apply a base coat of metallic paint to any areas you want to appear metallic. In my case, I'm using burnt iron from Vallejo metal color. Take your time with this step for a clean and polished look. For more on how to achieve different metallic finishes with contrast paints, click here. The final stage adds depth and a weathered look to the metallic parts with a wash. There are various options for washes, like Citadel washes, Army Painter washes, or Tamiya panel liners. However, I'll use oil paints for a different effect. Here's how it works. Take a tiny amount of black oil paint and thin it down with mineral white spirits until it's a thin black liquid. This will naturally settle into the recesses of the metallic areas, creating a more realistic effect. Oil paints are great for this because they dry slowly, giving you time to clean up any mistakes with a bit of mineral white spirits on an old brush. That's all there is to it. With just a few steps, we've achieved a dramatic effect on the miniature. Now you could finish the miniature by painting the base and applying varnish to protect your paint job. But for those who want to push things even further, stay tuned for our next and final video in this series. We'll take this miniature from tabletop to table wow. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of this how-to series. I hope you learned something new about using contrast paints to achieve a dramatic look on your miniatures and getting your army battle ready in no time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Let me know in the comments below what other painting techniques you'd like to learn in the future. Happy painting, everyone!